As I got ready to go with the younger department head, Jason, on a $30 million international business venture, he urged me to just wait outside. However, it was unbearably hot outside. It was ridiculous to expect me to wait in this heat for an extended period of time without knowing when the meeting would end. I could get sunstroke or heat stroke, at worst. However, Jason completely ignored me and stated that it was a department head's directive before entering the client's office by himself. 5 hours later, things were different when he saw me and our clients still waiting outside, exactly as he requested. Do you even know who he is? He. Yes, I am 40 years old, and under Jason's direction, my genuine identity is Kevin. I work for a specific company. I joined this organization because of particular reasons, but what I saw in the department to which I was assigned was startling. Are you the Kevin that will be employed in our department? The department head is me, Jason. You appear to be quite ineffective. Please watch out not to bring me down. 10 years younger than me, Jason, the department leader, made me feel inferior right away on my first day. I couldn't come up with a rationale, but it felt like he was judging me based only on how I looked. It was completely unjust. As per the accounts of fellow workers, Jason received an extraordinary promotion at the tender age of 30. It is said that his father, Mr. Thompson, the company's president, shoved him. His father was obviously proud of his son, who had been preparing to take over the company since he graduated from Tokyo University. The end result was that Jason had become unbearably conceited after deftly abusing his father's position of authority. He treated the staff like mere pawns, acting as though he had ascended to the top solely by his own merit. Stop dawdling and get a move on. The workers beneath him reluctantly obeyed his directions, not daring to challenge his authority. With a sinking heart, I observed this sight and wondered if I would wind up the same way. Jason started harassing me, as was to be anticipated. He slapped the documents down on my desk and said, "Handle these documents for me," as I was using my computer. My face twitched uncontrollably as I looked up to see Jason grinning and watching my response. No one else ever behaved just as I had predicted so consistently. He waved his hand dismissively and went back to his desk. "You're older than me, but you're still a rookie, so think of this as a learning experience," he added. I picked up the documents and sighed with frustration. I was shocked to see they were obviously intended for Jason when I went through them. That he would so blatantly shift his workload on a subordinate horrified me beyond belief. I saw him staring at his computer screen while seated at his desk as I glanced over at him once more. But I didn't think anything work-related was shown on the screen. I let out another sigh at the thought. There would be overtime because I had these paperwork to finish in addition to my own duties. I was caught in the crossfire, even though my original objective was to leave on time. Jason was undoubtedly aware that I wouldn't be able to handle these materials as a novice. Still, he gave them to me, probably just to complicate matters. He seemed to be suggesting, ask other supervisors to figure it out. His approach to staff supervision was incredibly unsuitable and gave me a headache. Jason's strange behavior continued even after I asked other supervisors for assistance to finish the documentation. I'd been with the company for about 3 months when he stated, "Just stand there and watch." When Jason and I went on a sales visit to a client one day, he put pressure on me to keep quiet and not to get involved. Reluctantly, I nodded in agreement. It seemed best, as a novice, to offer no explanations. I might as well use this as an opportunity to study Jason's sales strategies at this point. The client said, "Sorry about the heat in here. The air conditioner broke down, but please help yourselves to some chilled tea," as soon as we got to their office. The room we were shown had a malfunctioning air conditioner, which resulted in an uncomfortable temperature and perspiration dripping across our foreheads. It's early July and the outside temperature is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. There was a tiny bit of relief when the windows were opened, but not quite enough to notice. Instinctively, I reached inside my suit for a handkerchief to dab at the perspiration. Jason seemed completely defeated by the heat next to me. He's undoubtedly having trouble because our company's office is always quite air-conditioned. I couldn't help but laugh a little at his distress. Accepting the chilly tea our host offered, I said, "Let's take advantage of their hospitality, Jason. You should have some too," and urged Jason to follow suit. Jason gave me a stern look as he jerked back to reality, obviously irritated that I had provoked him. There's no need to be so angry. Following that quick chat, we got down to business, and Jason started negotiating with the client. Jason was often sloppy with his job, but during the discussions he went into business mode. I couldn't help but wish he would treat us employees with the same professionalism he was displaying today as I sat through the meeting in the oppressive heat. The tea I'd been offered was gone by the time the meeting was over. Damn, it's hot. As we were heading back to the office after the negotiations, Jason abruptly announced he was sick of the heat and that he was going to a neighboring cafe for solace. I went inside after him. "Order an iced coffee for me, will you?" "Yes," I answered. So I sat down across from Jason, who had taken his seat quite dramatically, and he told me to get the iced coffees. I phoned the waiter and asked for 2 iced coffees, as per his instructions. I couldn't help but shrug. Jason had become the more confident version of himself that I knew better. "It's quite hot outside. While we're at it, should we grab lunch?" I proposed, looking at the cafe's clock and realizing it was now past noon. Jason smiled mischievously, as if struck by a startling thought. "You're paying, of course." "Obviously. What are your preferences?" I was not fazed, so I answered calmly. Jason became grumpy, acting as though he thought I would be irritated. Unfortunately for him, I don't get worked up over something like this. In a stern voice, he said, "I'll have the omelette rice." I then gave the waiter a ring and placed an order for spaghetti and omelette rice for him. I ordered the pasta, by the way. We waited for a while without any talk, but I could understand why Jason was in such a nasty mood the entire time. It's not very enticing to have lunch with someone you don't particularly like. However, I couldn't help but giggle to myself about how strange Jason's order of omelette rice was. But a month later, Jason was still harassing people, and something altogether else had happened. A $30 million international agreement. Oh, Jason had stumbled into a much bigger business potential than he had ever seen before. Mr. Thompson had undoubtedly paved the way for his son's future success. Jason would certainly ascend even higher if this deal went through. I knew I would be in the spotlight too, as I was supposed to be going with him, but I knew Jason would not be happy about it. I prepared myself, thinking he would try to undermine me. Then came the day of the international transaction. The negotiations were scheduled to take place in the client's domestic branch, even though the deal was overseas. In an effort to arrive at the client's office 5 minutes prior to the scheduled meeting, Jason and I left early and walked there. The sun was beating down on us nonstop as we walked, scorching our flesh. The sun had been shining since the morning, and the sky was clear and devoid of clouds. The road ahead shimmered with mirages. We made it to the client's office without any problems, me using a handkerchief to dab at the perspiration on my brow. But then I heard Jason laugh aloud, very loudly, very quickly. "What's so funny?" I questioned, at first fearing he was affected by the heat. However, it didn't seem to be the case. With a menacing grin on his face, Jason ordered, "Old man, wait outside," even though he was perspiring. How come? I was momentarily unable to process what he had just said. Was he really advising me to sit here by myself in this intense heat? I'm sure that would be too risky even for me. There was a significant chance of sunstroke or heat stroke. "Are you serious, Jason? With this level of heat, staying outside is risky." I objected. "If you start feeling faint, just find somewhere else to hide. You're not going inside, though." On my own, I'm going to close this $30 million deal. You shouldn't be interfering with my promising future." Jason had told me to go with him, but it was obvious that he wanted me to stay out of the bargaining and take all the credit. What happened to me out here didn't matter to him. "Your department chief has given you this directive directly. Just wait here, without moving. Don't worry, I'll close this deal successfully," he stated dismissively as he entered the building, waving his hand. I was left behind and experienced conflicting feelings, but I chose to wait in some shade. I found a tree nearby and took a seat in its shade. Thank goodness I had taken a thermos of ice water in case something similar occurred. As I took a drink, it brought to mind the delectable tea I had while recently visiting another client of Jason's whose air conditioner had malfunctioned. I've always had a thermos with me ever since. I should be able to prevent heat stroke with this. I just needed to wait for Jason now. I finally saw Jason and the customer leave the building after roughly 5 hours, at which point I got up. I'm grateful. "It's really a dream come true," exclaimed Jason, obviously happy with how the talks turned out. I approached them. "I've been waiting for you, Jason," I replied. "You actually stayed out here the whole time?" With obvious shock, Jason inquired. The client turned to face me after noticing me as well. He expressed complete shock on his face the instant he saw me. R. Edward was the name tag on him. "Yes, I have spent nearly 5 hours waiting here." "How went the $30 million deal then?" I inquired. "Obviously. I performed my talents flawlessly," Jason bragged, his chest swelling with arrogance. But Edward was getting paler by the moment as he watched Jason and me converse. Then, with an angry expression on his face, he grabbed Jason by the shoulder and asked, "Do you even know who this man is?" "Ha!" Jason scowled, completely perplexed by Edward's abrupt reaction. "Whom?" "He is simply one of my subordinates and a worker for our organization. But he's totally worthless, so I advised him to stay outside rather than bring him to the talks." Jason laughed heartily as he recalled the incident. But Edward's face was colorless as he glanced at him. You have no idea what you've done, do you?" In desperation, Edward murmured and grasped his head. "What actions of mine do you mean? What is happening?" Confused by Edward's response, Jason inquired. I was laughing so hard at what I was seeing that I was having trouble controlling myself. Laughing uncontrollably, I decided it was time to tell the truth. "Actually, Jason, this isn't the first time I've met Edward." "What?" "Not at all. Are you only inventing this?" Jason scoffed and brushed off my statements like they were a practical joke. Not surprisingly, because I had only had 4 months to join the company and had no sales experience. He thought my narrative was ludicrous. "It's enough, this absurdity. I will not put up with this man being disrespected any longer. He will lead our organization as president in the future." Edward's voice broke through the tension with a boom. "What? The client company's future president?" Jason stumbled and looked at me in disbelief. I caught his stare, grinned, and made the decision to elaborate. "I'm sorry I didn't reveal my identity. The fact is that I joined your company in order to gather experience before I became the next president and left my father's." "Jason, this is your father's company." Looking up at the building where the negotiations had just taken place, Jason's eyes grew wide with surprise. It was bigger than Jason's company, for sure, but that wasn't the main thing. "Yes, that is true. I will be there shortly. However, I'm delighted I invested the time to learn more about the business sector, particularly now that I know someone who works with our clients is just like you, Jason," I went on. Jason went pale as the gravity of what I'd spoken dawned on him. Considering how he had treated me badly and purposefully left me out of today's negotiations, it seemed only fitting. I firmly said, "Of course, I will report your behavior to my father." "Hold on. I would never have done this if I had known you were going to be the client company's president." Jason begged fervently. Jason, crying about it won't make anything better. Additionally, I have a witness. This Edward has heard it all. I made a point. At those words, Jason came back to reality and shot a terrified glare at Edward. Edward, who was obviously furious, agreed with my explanation with a nod before glaring sharply at Jason. Edward serves as a close counselor to my father as well, and he will remain so in the event that I win the presidency. Therefore, I do not intend to let any troublemakers join the organization. If a corporation hires someone like you, I would rather sever my connection with them. Hold on. I mean, I'm an amazing negotiator, right? Did I close this $30 million deal? I can't just be let go by you. It was evident how desperate Jason was. No matter how good a negotiator you are, no one will follow someone who views their staff as pawns to be used as stepping stones up the ladder. Edward, what are your thoughts? I turned to him and asked what he thought. Edward nodded once again, confirming my view in full. Then he said something. The agreement we recently reached is void. I cannot sign a contract with someone who denigrates our company's future president, regardless of your level of talent. Since the contract had not yet been signed and was awaiting Mr. Anderson, the current president's approval, Edward's quick thinking saved the day. Jason may have caused more issues by using the contract as leverage if it had been signed. Being able to avoid that situation was a relief. You might as well depart right now as the contract hasn't been signed yet. With that, Edward struck the decisive blow. Not at all. Jason was so overcome with grief that his voice was hardly audible. Edward then beckoned me inside the structure, and I couldn't help but make one last remark to Jason as I passed him. Jason, it's quite unfortunate. Our future may have been bright if we had collaborated. Our businesses could have prospered considerably more, both of them. But it's obvious that you and I are fundamentally different after giving it some more thought. I stopped next to Jason and uttered those words. I understood then that there was a big difference between the two of us. I was out in the world getting actual experience, while you stayed sheltered at your father's firm doing as you liked, even though we were both destined to inherit our parents' businesses. Even if you may brag about your abilities, you have ultimately simply benefited from your father's achievements. I then grinned triumphantly, brushed him aside, and led Edward inside the building. Jason walked away stunned, fell to the floor, and just sat there. Jason lowered his shoulders and slowly walked out of the business after an employee told him to move aside when they checked on him later. He felt defeated. Was that really what he did to you? We ought to speak with him about it. Honestly, there's no reason to bother. As I sat on the sofa in a cool, air-conditioned meeting room, telling Edward what had happened, I said, "Please don't worry about it." When Edward found out about Jason's behavior, he became furious and showed signs of having not seen me since I had informed him that I would be working for experience at another company. After spending 5 hours in the sweltering sun earlier, his almost touching rage on my behalf let me let go of everything Jason had done to me. Edward made a special effort to look after me. I was given every cooling gadget the corporation owned, even though his anxiety seemed a little exaggerated. I could see why he was upset. His concern was somewhat warranted because I wouldn't have even carried a cooled thermos before now. I was really surprised when he pulled out a 2-liter bottle of water, thinking I hadn't had enough to drink. I truly am all right, I assure you. I spent my time in the shade under a tree that the corporation had planted. I could have spent the entire day outside in the scorching sun if that tree hadn't been there. I gave my explanation, telling Edward not to worry. In addition, the thermos I had brought with me was another thing that kept me alive. Really, Kevin, did you have a thermos with you? Typically, you're the kind who just grabs anything from the vending machine. That's the reason I'm happy I gained some practical experience. After having that ice-cold tea at the client's office, I developed the habit. I answered. It was so refreshing that I'll never forget it. It was hot in the room where the air conditioner had malfunctioned, but I learned something priceless from it. I was able to stay cool in the shade during the heat wave because of that cold drink, and I discovered that there are lessons to be learned from any unexpected circumstance. Edward gave me a perplexed look, not sure what to make of it all, while I grinned at the idea. In the end, though, he was glad that the situation had not become more serious. Jason did not lose any time in informing his father, Mr. Thompson, about the incident when he returned to his firm. But Jason wasn't prepared for the answer he got. How come? Am I getting demoted? When Jason was told he would be demoted with immediate effect, his amazement was evident. Kevin's resignation letter and his resignation, effective immediately, were delivered by someone acting on his behalf earlier today. Mr. Thompson fixed Jason with a serious look and added, "It turns out he's the son of the president of one of our major clients and the future president himself." Jason flinched away from his father's stern look as Mr. Thompson went on. "They want us to void the overseas arrangement and demote you in exchange for ignoring the multiple instances of abuse you've inflicted onto Kevin." I consented, vowing to keep a cordial connection with their business and to treat this issue seriously despite the fact that you are my son. "However, you cannot stop being demoted. However, you're my dad. Why aren't you supporting me?" Jason objected. "Our company will fail if I did not take this move. Is that your desired outcome?" Mr. Thompson asked his son, raising his voice. Jason stopped talking, at last realizing how serious things were. Jason's face showed that Mr. Thompson was beginning to realize something. "You should realize by now that their company, with its international branches, holds a stronger position than ours," he said once more. "You had better comply if you don't want to find yourself homeless. I guess I thought too highly of you." Speaking those last remarks, Mr. Thompson was filled with tremendous disappointment. He had no idea that his son had been abusing his position of authority. Only then did Jason acknowledge the seriousness of his errors, and as a result, his demotion was confirmed. After a year, Jason was back to his old job as a regular employee and making a fresh start. He no longer treated his staff like mere pawns, and he had lost his arrogance. Rather, he was now putting a lot of effort into his tasks. His objective was to eventually return to his role as department head, and he was progressively reestablishing confidence with the staff as well as his father, Mr. Thompson. Regarding myself, I was able to assume the role of president at my father's business. It took a lot of effort to gain my father's approval because he was a severe man. But I did, at last, a year after going back to work for the corporation. My entire endeavor, including the time I spent learning in a different organization, was not in vain. "Edward, from today onward, I'll be counting on you as my advisor," I replied. "Obviously. You can rely on me to treat you the same way I treated your father," Edward answered with assurance. His confident tone made me laugh uncontrollably, but it was also comforting. I thought I could accomplish things with him at my side that I couldn't do on my own. Actually, a year ago, Edward had taken the initiative and gone to see Mr. Thompson on my behalf in order to handle my resignation. Edward offered to act as my spokesman after I'd revealed all of Jason's transgressions. Few people possess the qualities of Edward: loyalty, competence, and total dedication. He had been my father's trusted advisor for many years, and he was loyal to me too. Though they never discussed it, it seemed like Edward was quite appreciative of my father for having assisted him in the past. I had more essential things to focus on, so I didn't push for further information. I had assumed official presidential duties as of today, and I had to focus on them. Having gained experience and having a capable staff by my side, I was driven to take the company to new heights.